Right, hello everyone. My name is Craig Lowell, and welcome to the newest edition of Catchpoint's Ask Me Anything series. Today we're going to be discussing everything related to service level management with a wide-ranging panel of experts from different industries. So we've selected a variety of questions from our audience that's going to cover things like the impact of third parties on your revenue and brand reputation, the challenges that monitoring teams face due to architectural complexity, how to compare and benchmark different third-party vendors, and strategies for holding them accountable through SLOs and SLIs. Now to introduce today's panel, starting with Myra Zarate, Application Monitoring Engineer at Autodesk. Myra's passion for application availability and performance has grown during her time at Autodesk, where she works with a broad application teams to monitor third-party application and service SLAs. Next up, we have Larry Paul, Enterprise Cloud Security Architect at IBM. Larry is responsible for both sides of SLA management, ensuring that IBM's cloud offerings are meeting their SLA obligations with their customers, as well as monitoring their own third-party vendors for any service disruptions that could affect IBM's end users. Also joining us is Jason Patel, CTO at Enighten. After starting at the company 7 years ago as an entry-level engineer, Jason is now responsible for making sure that Enighten's marketing security services have consistent performance, availability, and reachability for their customers. Finally, we have Catchpoint CEO and co-founder Mehdi Dowdy. Prior to starting Catchpoint, Mehdi created the quality of services team at DoubleClick, where he took charge of the company's service levels and worked with various monitoring tools to detect and triage any service disruptions that could have triggered SLA payouts to their customers. So once we get through as many pre-selected questions as we can, we're going to reserve the final 10 minutes here today for additional audience Q&A. So if you have a question during the webinar, simply type it into the Q&A box on your Zoom toolbar. And with that, let's go ahead and dive into the panel, then dive into the questions, I should say. So to start off, we're going to send the first question Myra's way. So Myra, what percentage of Autodesk's delivery chain is managed by third parties and ultimately out of your control?
Yeah, so out of all the applications that we currently have monitored at the time, it's about a heavy 42%, based off either if it relies or if it sits in within a third-party vendor. So something like Salesforce, Workday, internal, external applications, it's pretty heavy at 42%.
Excellent. So Larry, I wanted to send a follow-up your way because as the cloud security architect at IBM, you obviously have a lot of additional responsibilities as far as third parties are concerned. So would you say it's along the same lines as Myra, or do you have an even higher percentage outside of your control?
It kind of looks, it depends where you look, whether it's internal applications or that we're using internally or things we're hosting IBM Cloud, or basically snap-ons for IBM Cloud. So we're kind of a little bit of a mixed bag for that. But I would say we're probably pretty close to the same as Myra is at this point, around 40 to 45%, somewhere in that range is a pretty safe number.
All right, cool. And Mehdi, in your experience both with DoubleClick and Catchpoint, is that kind of along the same lines, or have you seen a growth in the outsourcing over the years?
So back at DoubleClick, there were not that many SaaS offering. They were called ASPs, and DoubleClick was one of the main culprit in the digital delivery chain that was impacting websites' performance. But then, the ad serving market was also pretty big. When I look at Catchpoint today, I would say that 90% of our internal application are SaaS third-party services, whether it's Salesforce or other solutions like that, or Office 365. So I would say 90% is all outsourced, and I think that's you see that. You see that a lot more in a more younger company than an IBM, just because we're digital first.
Sure. All right. So Larry, to kind of follow up on that, so when you're bringing new vendors on for your different services, whether it's infrastructure or software or platform, what's your preferred method for evaluating those vendors before actually signing the contract?
First thing for me always is definitely the technical deep dive. Depending on what type of product we're looking at and so forth, there's always a certain requirements we're going to have, period, whether it's for us internal, whether it's for our clients, or for our vendors. And typically we try to find one product that fits all three anymore. And I mean, when you start looking at the technical resources that are out there, they're growing daily. I mean, every time you turn around, there's a new product on the market that you have to figure out if it's something worthwhile or not. The nice thing is for us, I mean, like some of the things we look for specifically, it's like everything has to be that I can do in the UI, I can do in the API for technical. You know, things of that nature that just make things where we can code everything. We don't have to literally go out and touch it. But then from there, obviously, we look at financial stability of the company. One of the things we really like is their roadmap and what the history has been on the roadmap. It's nice if you have a pretty picture of a roadmap. If you never hit your goals, it doesn't really count. So we look specifically for that as well. And then, of course, our financial team will delve in, and unfortunately, the legal beagles have to compare contracts. And I'm sure Mehdi will tell you that's always fun with a company like IBM.
Absolutely. Yeah, Mehdi loves going through contracts. I can vouch for that. Jason, I want to bring you in here as well, because as a service provider, you obviously have an investment in how your prospects and customers are evaluating vendors. So do you ever kind of steer potential customers in a certain direction for evaluation, and how do you align that with your SLA obligations?
Yeah, sure. So, to kind of peel off what Larry said, everything Larry just mentioned, I'm basically on the receiving end for Enighten side. But in addition to that, we experience a lot of additional questions, mainly around how can I guarantee the availability of service? What kind of SLAs do you offer? How is Enighten monitoring our SLAs, and how can we provide that transparency of information back to our customers to ensure that there isn't some smoke and mirror show here? So it helps when with Catchpoint, especially, where you could kind of show the transparency of data, share reports, and kind of be able to demonstrate that, hey, look, this is the level of monitoring and data collection that we're doing across our platform. So if there is specific metrics that our customers are looking for, the platform enables us to be able to say, hey, yeah, we can actually support that SLA in addition to our normal one, or if there's specific geographies or ISPs that they care about, we can actually verify that those are locations we're actively monitoring from as well.
All right, excellent. And along the idea of geographies, Larry, I want to go back to you here. When you're collecting monitoring data for your SLAs, where do you prefer to run your tests from, both geographically and different networks? And are there any locations that you wouldn't bother testing from?
So for us, it's interesting. We have some customers that are very geographically based, and so our services are geared specifically to them. And so for that standpoint, I want to be as close to the customer as humanly possible and on as many networks in their region as possible. So that's one of the things you guys have given us that literally was for one of our divisions. That was a huge issue they were having, was being able to monitor if it's one of the Nordic countries, because there's not a lot of good service in some of those countries, and a lot of people do not have endpoints there. You don't want to test from where your cloud is and where you're actually providing the service from. So you want to be, again, as close to the endpoint as humanly possible. That's one of the things, like I say, Catchpoint has given us. You give us backbone, you give us mobile, you give us all the primary ISPs in these different countries. And so from that standpoint, it's allowed us to prove to our customers when there has been an issue where they were seeing something that is specific to an ISP or specific to a geographic region. The way our SLAs are written for some of those services, that's just been instrumental and monumentally savings for us. I won't throw the numbers out that we've saved in the past couple of years for that. But also the same way the other way around is for our vendors. Since we do have customers all over the place, we get a lot of third-party vendors that may be unique to one or two of our customers, or maybe unique to to a specific platform, and being able to test those guys locally as well as from other countries. So if we're offering a payment processing service behind one of our applications, what countries are people coming from that are hitting that service? We want to test from all of those. That way we get a good, clear indication of exactly what's going on. There's way too many times you test on the same network or too close, you get things noisy, it's not reliable. So I want to be as close but as separate from them as humanly possible.
Right, right. Myra, do you have the same experience at Autodesk? Because obviously you guys have a global user base as well. So how important is the geographical testing for Autodesk's SLA monitoring?
Yeah, absolutely. So geographically based, I mean, having the the ability to be able to monitor from the different locations, because we have application services that are hosted only in specific locations.
Yep.
So without that, we wouldn't have that visibility to see how these individuals from this region are experiencing that UI. Because I mean, you know, I'm here, I'm not there, you know. So it'll just make it makes it so much more easier to understand that, you know, first or front row perspective, I would say, when we have the ability for not only the different geographical locations, but the different ISPs, you know, the backbone, the last mile. I mean, who are your customers? What kind of internet do they have? I mean, backbone, great, fast speed, but based on your enterprise or your company, are you having the average? You know, what kind of ISPs they're using based on, I mean, not everyone's an engineer, you know what I mean? We have our regulars. I mean, you know what I mean? Just, you know, your regular consumer, someone who's, you know, more basic, purchasing, e-commerce, stuff like that. So.
Excellent. Jason, I want to go to you as well. So when it comes to you know, monitoring your Enighten zone SLA obligations, where are you guys testing from, and do you find that there are any locations that aren't really worth it?
Yeah, definitely. So for us, we test from where our customers are. So most of our customers are the Fortune 500. So wherever their customers are arriving at their digital properties from is where we like to test from. So major metropolitan areas globally, especially in North America and EMEA. So the places that we generally don't care about are, you know, places that we know that we already have visibility into. So one of the key criteria when we were evaluating Catchpoint was that, hey, this is not a cloud-based monitoring solution, because a couple of the other ones, when we started evaluating them, our numbers looked amazing. You know, we went from like a reasonable 50, 60, 70 millisecond response time to 12, 20. And this is, for us, you know, those are useless numbers, right? Because, like, yeah, while they look amazing, they're not going to provide me any business value, nor if I ever showed this to a customer, they would just laugh me out of the room, because clearly there's something else going on here where, you know, you're obviously talking from the same network.
Right, absolutely. So Myra, going back to you real quick, who at Autodesk is responsible for all of the measuring and tracking and reporting of all the different SLAs? And are different teams responsible for different components of the infrastructure? And, you know, what sort of different tools and methodologies are those teams using?
Yeah, so we do have teams, vendor management teams, based off the application, the service, they're split between them. However, as part of the monitoring team, we're responsible to provide them that data, provide them what we're seeing, how we're behaving, using our monitoring tools, such as Catchpoint, to be able to pull that data, those screenshots, what is the user seeing? So part of our responsibility is monitoring that service, monitoring that UI, and providing a dashboard. So if it's either via Catchpoint, public link, or if we're creating something external or very custom to help them visualize. I mean, because why would they need to go in and see a monitor when we can pull the dashboard to be able to see that SLA that's been provided by the vendor? Absolutely.
So Larry, is you know, someone working for a major enterprise like IBM, do you have a similar scenario where you have different teams responsible for different components, and how do you kind of you know, unify that with a monitoring platform?
So there's many departments to deal with this, again, for both directions, like I said, vendor and client. One of the nice things that Catchpoint gives us is the ability to set up divisions. So we can have one master account and multiples underneath that. And so we can give teams specific access to their views. They can actually see it live. Then we can roll this data up as well into other dashboards if we need to. One of the things we're doing is taking a lot of the Catchpoint data and marrying it with other system monitoring as well. And it's amazing to see what I can pull out of Catchpoint that shows trends coming, or I can see trends in hardware performance that also starts impacting the SLAs on the outside. So it's nice to be able to correlate that data and really benchmark across multiple locations as well. So I mean, that's one of the things we use a lot. The teams love it, it very easily allows them to say, look, we're seeing this from 20 different countries. We know it's a common trend, or vice versa, we're seeing only from one country. So we know there's a problem in that country, and we can isolate that pretty quickly. But it helps our teams constantly be able to identify that quickly and easily. And it's made the vendors, honestly, very more open to the discussions, I think is the way I'll put it. When we have that flat data, we can show it to them real quick and easily.
Jason, as a vendor yourself, is that a similar scenario that you have coming from ensuring the actual uptime and availability and performance? And do you like it when people like Larry are coming in with their own monitoring methodologies that they want you to follow?
No, they're not.
Well, I guess it depends on what the monitoring methodology is, but let me address the first part. So Enighten is very proactive with our SLA monitoring, so we actually publish SLA reports on a monthly basis and deliver them to our customers before they even ask. So for us, having these numbers ready in hand is vital to making sure that we conduct our business in a way that is kind of in the spirit of transparency and openness. And, when customers come back or out of band, like, middle of the month, they say, hey, we think you're having an issue in this region, or this is what we're seeing, right? Catchpoint actually has been very, very useful because it allows you to share data pretty easily outside your organization. So, when I'm speaking to someone like Larry, he can show me what he's looking at the Catchpoint, and I can say, okay, well, this is how our tests are configured. Let's look at where the discrepancy is. Maybe there's something we're missing. Maybe there's a different monitoring setup on their end. But it actually puts us in a position where we can actually have that discussion. And then on the other side, if our customers are, say, using some in-house built monitoring solution or, maybe another vendor, right, we can actually go in and further put ourselves in a defensible position where we say, hey, look, this is the level of granularity we're pulling our data from. Let's look at why this data is a little bit more authentic than maybe you guys monitoring from behind your network. Maybe you guys are using one full ISP or IP block, and so therefore geo load balancing isn't maybe working as correctly as it may be, right?
Right. Mehdi, when you were founding Catchpoint with your other co-founders, is that you were coming from a quality of services team at Google and DoubleClick, where you're monitoring different components with different teams. How did that kind of inform the way that you guys designed Catchpoint?
Well, I think the panelists said a lot of very important things, the concept of trust, because that's what SLAs are here for, is to establish a trust between a customer and the vendor. It also, SLAs are about creating a baseline and also be able to speak a common language. I don't see an SLA anything but a common language between the vendor and the customer. This is what I expect from you, and this is what you should deliver. And if there is a problem, then let's talk numbers. Let's figure out what's wrong with the methodology. So obviously, based on that, the ability to share the data, to invite people to look at the data, these are some of the capabilities. But the most important one is around the data quality, right? Although we're chasing perfection here, but the noise level of the monitoring tools need to be reduced, and those are some of the things that we spent and we still spend an enormous amount of effort, money in where do we collect the data, how do we make sure that the signal to noise ratio is minimized, because it's not just about availability and waking up the NOC or sending a ticket. It's about service level agreements. I mean, some of our customers have very, very strong SLAs with a lot of money attached to them. And so we take that, we wanted to make sure that from the get-go, we would never be in a position where we can impact one of those things in a negative way. So the data quality is important. And also, I think both Paul and Jason mentioned this a lot, which is you need, for SLAs to be meaningful, they also need to have a set number of data points. If you're just monitoring from one location and you have one data point every 15 minutes, I think we all agree on this panel, and some of our attendees would agree, averages suck, right? So you don't want averages. So if you're not measuring enough, if you're not measuring from as many places, the statistics or the laws of statistics play against the SLAs. And so it's very important to monitor the right thing, to monitor it the right way. And expose it. I love what Jason said. It's all about being transparent. I did the same thing at DoubleClick, where all my SLAs, and we had a lot of SLAs. Everything was published. We had the website. People would go in and be able to see the numbers, and the methodology was also described. I think the world we live in is going to be more and more geared toward this level of transparency that is expected, but also the level of trust between vendors and buyers. And everything should be on the open. Put out how you monitor things, put out your numbers, and allow customers, if they have a question, hey, I don't understand where this number come from, have the ability to interact very quickly. So I'm a big fan of that level of transparency. I think it just creates better relationships between vendors and customers.
Absolutely. Larry, kind of along those lines, when you're setting up an SLA with a new vendor, what's your process for ensuring that their own SLA monitoring is geographically comprehensive? So, making sure that their strategies are in place, that they're able to ensure the users have the same experience, whether they're in New York or London or Tokyo. How do you go about doing that?
So a lot of that's asking to literally see SLA reports, to see like for the past 6 or 7 months, to get an idea of where you've seen incidents, and then see where they are really truly testing from, but also understanding where their equipment's hosted, the different environments, to make sure they are outside of their environment, not just inside, to make sure where they're testing from really does represent the users. And kind of like someone referenced earlier, we were getting 10 or 12 milliseconds, but it's because you're basically testing inside, it didn't mean anything. So making sure those numbers are real, working with these guys, again, a lot of times, like, Jason probably hates it when somebody like me comes in because I'm delving into their technical background as well, when exactly where are all of your treasures hidden. But it's part for us to understand, and specifically if it's an interface between us. So if it's something we're integrating and using back and forth, that integration has to happen. So we have to have a better understanding of who's doing what to whom. And again, where are your weaknesses? Specifically, since we do have we have an international user base, where are the weaknesses that you could potentially see from certain countries? I mean, it's like you go to Iceland or somewhere like that, their connections are pretty poor. So you're going to expect a huge difference in performance. But being able to see what they do have currently set up, see what tests we want to perform ourselves from outside of them, to see what they're doing internally, even for SLOs. SLAs are great for us, but what are they doing internally to make sure they're holding themselves to a stronger requirement than we're holding them to? And then honestly, to make sure that we're coming to an agreement about what those SLAs should be, what's real, what's not. So that we're all on the same page when we get into it from the beginning. But again, ISPs and geographies are huge issues for me on that. The ability, one of the things, I know Byron and Jason both have mentioned the public URL. That is one of the most powerful features inside of Catchpoint, because you guys give full access to all that detail that I can very easily share with a partner very quickly. And again, we're both speaking the same thing at that point, easily seen. So that type of capability from our partner is also very critical for us.
Sure. So Myra, when you're going through your day-to-day SLA monitoring, how do you account for discrepancies across different geographies or ISPs or anything like that?
Yeah, so same way that it was mentioned a few times today is just being able or having that monitor set up in different locations. Of course, prioritizing locations, but also not forgetting about those other locations. As I've heard, just because we have a lesser consumer base at this location doesn't mean we don't care about it. It's one thing I don't like to hear is like, oh, let's leave that on the side because we only, 10% of our consumers are there. You still don't want to give anybody. So although setting up a prioritization, where's everybody coming from, setting up those different monitors or that monitor off different locations. If different, different ISPs, I had a case where it's all the same ISP, different locations, which, I recommended you don't want to do. So don't do that. So, about that, it's, and we can go on, is just being able to have those locations, not only externally, but internally as well. So our enterprise nodes that we're able to set up, it's not, it's about the consumers, outside of the company, but also the productivity of the employees inside. So the enterprise nodes, and then we're also geographically based. You know, we got people here, US, we got people out in, you know, India and Canada and all locations. So even having that availability ensures, you know, depending what service, what vendor it is, you know, like if our vendors are from internal applications, we want to make sure all the functionalities, availabilities there for everyone, you know, regardless. So, you know, just you know, having the ability for the geographical nodes, the enterprise nodes internally.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, I'm going to tie back in on that real quick, because one of the key things, specifically when you look at the geography and being able to look at the ISPs, I can't tell you how many times all of a sudden somebody's raised the red flag, oh my God, we're down. And you look and it turns out it's Telia in Stockholm, and that's the only person that's having a problem. And it's very easy to look on the web and realize, oh, there's a DNS issue with that ISP or in that country. Specifically when we're dealing with some of the smaller countries, one DNS issue in that country takes them offline. You know, they're just gone. And instead of spending hundreds of hours of man hours over the years researching what we think is a quote unquote downtime, we can very quickly identify the fact that, oh, look, there must be an issue there. We go look, and sure enough, you find that there is specific to that geographic region, and it's something 100% outside of your control. So there's nothing you can do about it but monitor for it to come back. And again, one of the things Catchpoint I love does allows me to do additional tests and do DNS checks and network checks immediately upon a failure. So I can look at that response and say, oh, look at this. Catchpoint's telling me there's issues with DNS. Again, it takes me typically 5 minutes to find something that says there's a huge outage in Iceland and they're offline. So just something I thought I'd throw out there, because it's the geography and, like I said, ISPs to me is a huge issue for us. It's a great, wonderful tool.
Absolutely. Jason, speaking from the vendor perspective, what do you think a provider has to implement? What are the most important things that you have to implement as far as tools or processes or the specific data that you're collecting in order to really ensure that you're providing a robust SLA for your customers?
Yeah, so, you know, for us specifically, generally, like our SLA consists around two things: availability and response time, especially when your resources are public-facing, right? So customers leverage their assets, or our assets hosted on our networks on their public pages. So for us, you know, when we set up our SLA monitoring and our SLA, we need to make sure that, hey, from their business values, right, what do they even gauge their own website on? Because that's going to be the same criteria we're going to be judged by. But then in addition to that, when we talk about setting up the processes and systems around our SLA, we need to make sure that we can see and speak the same language as our customers when it comes to talking about this data, but then also have the granularity and visibility into data so that should an issue arise, we can proactively alert our customers saying, like, hey, look, we're having an issue at Atlanta. These are the preventative measures you can take to avoid mitigation, or to mitigate that issue against your website, rather than, you know, waiting for our customers to reactively find out about the issue. On the other side, it's also making sure that we have the processes in place, but both from, you know, obviously a contractual and credit, SLA management perspective, but also from a support level perspective. Hey, do we know how to advise customers to mitigate these issues? At what level is the issue happening, right? Is it unique in a region? Is it unique in ISP? How can we tell customers to react to this? And can we even give them further advice, right? This is one thing that Catchpoint's been super helpful with, is when we see issues across the web because of the way our resources are consumed, we can actually additionally also tell customers, hey, you know, other providers that are using maybe this DNS provider and say level 3 in Atlanta, you may want to look into their performance too, because there's a good chance you're seeing issues not just on us, but across the board, right? And then, you know, they take a step back and go, okay, hey, look, thanks for the heads up. We actually got bigger issues. Let's get back to you guys later, right? But it helps the relationship a lot when we can talk to that and say, like, hey, we're not just looking at it from our standpoint. You guys might be having issues otherwise, and we can help provide visibility to that too.
Excellent. So, Myra, when you're working with the different providers, do you find the same situation where, you know, you have specific processes that you're looking for, and, you know, what do you do if a vendor isn't really able or willing to provide those?
Yeah, so most of our communication, or my communication, is more with the vendor management team. So after them explaining to us what should be monitored, what is provided, getting a deep dive or deep detail of what we're being provided. I mean, you know, it's just about having that monitoring effort, you know, being able to understand, also, you know, getting in link with the vendor to see how open they are to working together on monitoring, right? Because there's a point where it's out of our hands, you know, all we can do is open a ticket because, you know, our customers are seeing or our monitor went out because this is not available. So pretty much just having that open communication, that real clear visual, you know, so it's really easy to make a monitor, but it's harder to understand what you should monitor and then the details to creating the monitor, which is something that, you know, is able to be done within Catchpoint, you know, and you know, it's a very important detail. You know, what's the point of having a monitor that's not, you're not going to be able to see something that's easily understandable. Most likely, you know, using the waterfalls, you know, the images, the film strips, it's something that, you know, we find highly valuable because again, it's taking a screenshot of what the user is seeing. What are they seeing? Oh, okay, maybe we see that the responses are good or you know, all these requests are coming through, but what is seen on the image? You know what I mean? So,
Yeah.
um,
Yeah, so Larry, Myra hit on something really interesting there about the need for the data to be digestible. So, you know, obviously SLAs have such a huge impact on revenue, both for the vendors and the customers. So, how do you kind of you know, translate the monitoring data into easily digestible stuff for, you know, the business operations teams that need to at least understand the impact of this if they don't necessarily understand all the technical components?
Right. A lot of the things we'll do generally right now for the different departments, we'll just generate their monthly reports, let them get that, where they can see exactly what their overall numbers were. And then from that point, if it's like, okay, well, why was this at a 99% when we expected 99.9%, then they'll start delving down a little bit deeper. And I have the same situation Myra does. The teams, they know the numbers are wrong and they can understand parts of it, but as far as doing the deep dive into it, really understand where the problems happened, typically that's not on our vendors' side, the vendor teams. But what it really comes down to is the data we've collected, seeing the tickets we created for an incident where we saw a performance issue and where we reached out to our partner, whether it's a vendor or a client again, and said, hey, we're seeing this issue. What are you guys seeing? It goes back to what everybody said. And I think the simple solution is communication, communication, communication. And honestly, trust. Like Mehdi said, if you don't have the trust with your partner, then it's not going to work. And again, Jason, as a vendor, people are always coming after him. But if we have that right relationship, when I say, hey, I'm seeing this, he's going to pay attention immediately and look at it versus waiting, you know, for 100 other people to get to it. So I mean, that's to me one of the key things, being able to delve down deep. And Catchpoint gives me the ability so easily to drill down all the way to where the problems are. And again, to share that data with a third party, whether it's to give them a login where they have a read-only view or to do the public URLs. Those things are just phenomenal for us. And working with that team to let them understand the tools too. But more importantly, it also goes back to that original discussion of what you're monitoring internally, what we want you to monitor, and what we're agreeing to monitor, and what the true SLAs are, and what we've agreed to are impacts of what are not. Sometimes you'll have a slow performance, and it's really not an impact. We're not going to hold it against them, specifically for something they can't control. Mm-hmm. So again, but that comes down to that relationship again, that free-flowing communication, where I can call Jason and say, hey, I'm seeing this, but I think it's this. What do you think? And we can immediately start conversing back and forth.
I'll add something to what Larry said. So it's very important to communicate, obviously. So SLAs are mostly known between what a vendor has with a customer or customer has with a vendor. It's in the contract. You agree, I'm buying this service, and you agree to give me 99% availability or 300 millisecond response time. So that's what's agreed between these two parties. The biggest drawback or the biggest challenge is when those SLAs that are signed between a customer and the vendor are not taken inside by the vendor and applied as service level objectives, as internal SLAs. Yes. And so, for example, back at DoubleClick, when I gave an SLA of 99.5 to a customer, internally, then I went and made that SLA 99.9, right?
Yeah.
Much higher. So the service level objective or the internal SLA was much more drastic, I guess, or severe, just because you do not want to miss. You want a buffer between the internal SLA and the external SLA. And so when we talk about communication, yes, the communication between the customer and the vendor is extremely important. It has to be based on trust, etc. Internally, you take that, you create these SLOs or internal SLAs,
Yep.
and you drive a culture of performance internally, where now your employees, like for example at DoubleClick, all the folks we had in the IT group were completely tuned to the SLAs we had with our customers. So they knew, and we had that in the dashboards and the NOC, etc. So they were completely in tune with the external SLAs, because what you don't want is agree with the customer and then internally you have chaos because I don't know what you signed, I don't know what's an SLA. Right. So you need to bring that down as well throughout the entire organization and rally people around what you have signed up with externally.
Right. It's all about kind of tying everything back to, you know, what really matters, what end users are going to be experiencing, right, and how that's going to impact everyone. So this next one, I definitely want to get everyone's input, because I'm sure you all have some interesting stories. But how do we'll start with Myra. How do you overcome a situation where your monitoring data is saying one thing and your vendor's monitoring data is saying something different? How do you get past that disparity?
That's actually really funny, because sometimes I like to tell people, like, hey, Catchpoint didn't wake up today and say they wanted to show an error, you know, on your page, you know, when we got it physical image there, you know. So I mean, it's not about, you know, hey, it's your fault, or it's my fault. It's more of just how can we work together to either not to understand what's going on here. Let me provide you the data that you need or that we have in order for you to take a deeper dive on what might have gone wrong. There's been issues where I mean, not even our applications knew that something occurred, and I reached out, hey, you know, this and this and this, here's an image, here's a request, here's the content, the headers, all that, you know, great information. Oh, I didn't know that. We don't have maintenance scheduled. Oh, let me go get with my vendor, you know, like what's going on. So from there is when I work with them to provide them all the detail that we have. Like I said, when you have good monitoring in place, when you really do understand what you're supposed to monitor, you can provide that level of detail that they need to further execute. Maybe they didn't see it. There's a few vendors out there that don't put up a status or like, oh, you know, we have issues going on now till after the fix, you know. So then that's when we have to work on setting up monitors where we can be, you know, proactive or immediately. We don't want to wait for a customer to be like, oh, hey, your shit's down, you know what I mean? Like, what's going on? I can't reach, you know, this or that. So, you know, on that, we have our monitor set up and we can, you know, share all this information, valuable, you know, what exactly the customer is saying to the vendor, and have them explore further. If it was either past, if it was minimal time, extensive time, whatever the case may be, just having that data there.
Cool. So, Jason, do you have similar experience as, you know, as the vendor that's responsible for this? Have you had customers come to you and say, you know, hey, such and such is down, it's your fault, and you have to, you know, come back over the top and show that it's not your fault, or, you know, you missed something? How do you overcome those conflicts as well?
Yeah, definitely. So, you know, on two sides, right? One is like in the ultra rare occurrence that there is an issue at site, being proactive with telling customers and displaying that information in a publicly retrievable place, kind of like what Myra had mentioned earlier. Like, you know, those are just common standard things you could take to help, you know, maintain that customer relationship in, like, obviously a hopefully just stressful couple minutes or day. But then on the other side, right, discrepancies always occur, right? Everybody does the same thing 100 different ways. And But the nice thing is it's IT talking to IT. At the end of the day, we're all analytically driven. We all care about numbers. We all care about methodology, right? So when you show them Catchpoint and, we look at, hey, what are you, all right, let me tell you how I'm testing. These are numbers I'm showing. This is the method. Like Catchpoint also has amazing documentation. So it's like, I can actually describe and say like, well, these are the circumstances in which our monitors operate in. Can you tell me yours, right? Can we understand the network conditions in which you're operating at, right? And then we could make sure, hey, we're comparing like by like, right? And, in a case where maybe there is an issue that seems like it's only appearing in the customer monitor versus the Catchpoint monitor, right? Then we can look at seeing how we can tune the Catchpoint monitor to, for example, that customer's monitor more closely and potentially reproduce it, right? But at least having that visibility of data gives us two advantages in those discussions. One is it allows us to have an easier discussion with the customer because, we can be upfront and transparent with that data. But two, because of the level of data we provide, we can walk the customer through it and provide them that education session on maybe they don't know how to monitor what we're looking at, right? Maybe they're looking at as if this is just a service that they're more commonly used to, that they're used to looking at internally, right? So having that information handy will help facilitate that education session. And you can, again, demonstrate that information with retroactively with historical data as well.
Absolutely. So Larry, since you kind of deal with both sides, how do you reconcile the two, when there's disparities in the data? They're showing two different things.
Hopefully the show and tell and the walk them through everything really pulls it out and makes them understand what we're seeing versus what they're seeing. But then it comes down to why are we seeing something, they're seeing something different. And that goes back to, again, having a company like Catchpoint, who is an independent third party for us, that can point blank state, this is what we're seeing, because you guys already provided analysis for us before on these sort of conversations. So be able to get that type of data and provide it to our customers or to our partners is a godsend. You guys have jumped on calls with us in the past to even explain what you were seeing, and it's so very easy to see without the depth of the areas you guys test from and the depth of the checks that you guys do. It was very easy to point out, okay, this is what we were seeing, some strange issue here. And even if you can't give us a smoking gun, 9 times out of 10 you can point us to it, and we can figure it out from there. But having that, again, ultimately it's going to come down to your contract with your customer of who's going to make the tiebreaker. But having that data that's sitting there that can easily show it is the crucial part.
Mm-hmm. So you kind of staying on the.
Sorry.
Oh yeah, go ahead.
Add something here. So the only thing I would add is you have to remember that typically when somebody's going to reach out to a vendor or a customer, because I was on the vendor end, like Jason on the receiving end,
yep.
You have to let cool heads prevail. So the first thing I've always used to tell customers is like, listen, I'm here to help, but we need to agree. Let's cool down a little bit, because typically those conversations are never they never happen when everybody's happy, right? So it's the typical tension to start with. So my first thing was always to diffuse the tension. And when it came to methodologies, I used to use this joke, is like, I bet you anything that I can put 10 people, give them 3 eggs, and we'll have 30 different omelets, right? Everybody's going to cook those damn eggs a different way. So, but let's go back to the cookbook, right? The SLA, the document. What did we agree on? What did we talk about? What did we agree on the methodology? Those kind of things. But it's diffusing the situation so then we can get to the root cause. Otherwise, it becomes like a pissing match of who's going to shout the loudest. I'll get the lawyers involved, and you owe me $1 million in SLAs. And so it's really about like, okay, I'm here to help. We'll get through this, but let's go back to the basic. What did we agree on?
Mm-hmm. So kind of staying along the lines of proof points and payouts. Myra, have there been any situations where Catchpoint has really helped Autodesk enforce an SLA with a vendor, and either catching something that they didn't catch and otherwise would have gone unnoticed, or being able to dive in deep to the data to really understand the root cause?
Yeah, absolutely. There's been times where it's been mentioned to us, the monitoring team, that our data has been of use to enforce the SLA or to acknowledge a breaching of the SLA. So pretty much, kind of just going back of what was mentioned is the majority of the case is to be able to communicate efficiently, right? Like Mehdi mentioned, like, not go in with it's your fault, my fault kind of thing. But when you're talking about the agreements, or I would assume so, I personally don't talk with the vendors, but I would assume so that communication to be very clear, to have that, provided data, what are you seeing? Like, Larry mentioned, what are you seeing? What am I seeing? What do I have? And then what do you have? That would, highly then come to an agreement, hey, it was breached, or we're shit close to it, you know what I mean? But it's, yeah, definitely, there's been cases where we've been recompensated and such more, but it's not more about, oh, we're getting money back. It's not that, we're paying for a service. So the service is what we want,
Right.
not the money back. We want the service. So just being able to
Exactly.
clearly, efficiently communicate and have that data to where everybody's coming on, everybody's able to do whatever they're supposed to do on our application. The services are working fine. Everything's flawless. That's what we want.
And Jason, have you had any situations where a customer has been reporting an SLA breach, and you've been able to use Catchpoint to show that it actually wasn't on your end, it was somewhere else, either in the network or a cloud provider or something like that? And how does Catchpoint's monitoring actually help you do that?
Yeah, definitely. So for us, this has happened multiple times where customers will say, "Hey, we're hearing an outage in this region of EMEA or APAC or something like that," right? And Catchpoint data lets us actually be able to speak intelligently to that outage. But also, the way we've crafted our SLAs is, again, leveraging something like Catchpoint lets you control how that SLA gets monitored, right? So we can tell customers that this is the monitoring methodology that we ascribe to in order to enforce our SLA. So with that, right, with something like Catchpoint, where the monitoring methodology is quite robust, when you talk to customers with that, they generally agree with that setup, saying like, okay, yeah, that's an acceptable way for us to monitor that solution. So when the customer says like, hey, I'm seeing like weird, say, Akamai issues in some region of the world, we can go back and say, well, this is not actually an Enighten issue. This is an issue with these resources from this vendor, and they just seem like they are based off of your monitoring or logging not being as granular as you may like it, right? The other side, the other thing is like when we talk about SLA credits, all that stuff, like Byron said, like no one really, like SLA credits are just kind of a band-aid to the wound, right? That's not what really customers really care about. What they really want is our service, and that's what they're paying us for. So, it's on us to make sure that, hey, you're actually ahead of the curve on this and preventing outages, or in the case of should an outage occur, being able to be upfront about it and be able to address this rapidly as possible by understanding at what level the outage is occurring at. And then lastly, even outside of credits, right, there's plenty of situations where, hey, maybe a customer doesn't have a great credit system in their contract, right? So it's like you have an outage and you're going to say, like, oh, I'm gonna pay them $500, right? Like, no one's going to be happy on that, right? But you look at something like Catchpoint where, like what Larry said, you could build that relationship with the customer, and, you look at beyond just a penalty cost, right? Because you've already invested so much money into this customer, right? From getting them as a customer originally, working with them from implementation strategy to the point that they are a customer now. So, now that you've spent all this money and trust and relationship building with a customer, are you willing to let it go to the wayside just because you weren't willing to set up a couple monitors in a certain region of the world, or set up to go after a certain level of granularity of monitoring? This is where Catchpoint has been very instrumental to us, because, we could show customers that, while this may not be super important for all our 500 clients, for you it's important. So we actually set up monitoring here. We could show you transparency of that region of the world, and we could show you how we're looking at it and making sure that we both are speaking the same language.
Right. Right. So before we get into this this final question before the Q&A, I do want to encourage anyone listening who has an additional question, feel free to type it into the Q&A window on the Zoom toolbar. Should be at the bottom of your screen if you hover over it. So leading into to the Q&A, Mehdi, you had mentioned this this briefly earlier about aligning internal and external KPIs. So Larry, you know, this is kind of a big part of the SRE practice that's being adopted all over.
Very much so.
And IBM is a practitioner of that. So how do you go about, how do you see, you know, this internal KPIs really impacting the external SLAs?
So if you really look at it, as I indicated earlier, you've got your SLA, which is what you've promised to an outside party. Your SLO should be much more stringent. But on top of that as well, is you really should have a lot more tests that you're doing internally, because there's different things that are important to the teams internally as well. Different things that could lead to early indicator of a problem, maybe with a third party. So it's getting the teams to think differently and to make everyone realize, specifically application developers, that these monitoring tools are there to help them more than anybody. And the more data they raise, the more data we can provide, the more data we can examine. We can provide better feedback to the developers, which helps our customers get what they want, which is an always-on system. So the SLOs play this huge part in making basically everyone part of the system. It's like Mehdi indicated earlier too. It's like SLA is an outside thing. No one wants to talk about it. That's, you know, something contracts deal with, and you know, and they shake their hands of it and they're done with it. SLOs are kind of bringing that back in-house, and it's also making where you have the SRE who's actually holding the developers on his team highly responsible for performance on that system, and basically guaranteeing proof of that by raising these metrics up so you can see it. One of the things you guys provide us is the enterprise server, which actually allows us to build pretty much any type of check we want internal through code and be able to raise that data up to you guys. So again, we're sending that data out from, you know, from a third-party appliance basically out to a third-party system. So we know for a fact that's contained, it's secure, and it's good data. And then I can actually match that data with other data for SLA as well. And it really starts giving us an overall view of what's going on in the environment. So getting people to understand that and getting them to start working towards those objectives is sometimes challenging. That's how I think the polite way I'll put it.
Mehdi, you had experience setting that up. Did you have a similar experience at DoubleClick establishing those internal SLOs?
Yeah, and so the main reason we ended up doing that is because there was a disconnect between what was agreed on with our sales team and our customers versus
Yes.
the IT team. And I think out of all of you on this panel, I'm the one who gave the most green dollars back. But you know, I was maybe 2-3 months into the job of running the quality of service team, and I had to walk into our CFO and say, you know, we have to give back $1.5 million to a single customer. And so at that point, that's when things got really serious for us, because we couldn't afford to do that anymore. And so we paid $1 million, not in credits, which is very different. So this was literally, we wrote a check back. And at that point, that's where we created we took over the SLA process completely, and rightfully so. But then we made, for every SLA, there were maybe 20-30 SLOs behind it. Behind every SLO, there were like hundreds of KPIs. And so it trickles down, because what you want is you want to catch a problem before it's too late, right? Service level management is about risk mitigation to some degree. And so if you have the right telemetry, you have visibility into when a breach, whether it's an internal breach or external breach, is about to happen, and you can do actions. So we took it to the point where my team was able to basically put a stop on any more releases for the month or the week, because we already had consumed our SLA budget, which is now a term that is getting more fashionable with the SRE practice, rightfully so. But these are the things we used to think about in 2000, so many years ago, just because of that $1.5 million payout that was very painful. So we learned the hard way.
All right, so we had one question come in from our listener. What are the? I'll go around starting with Myra. So what are your top 3 recommended KPIs that every company should be monitoring for?
Well, pretty much just depending on what service is provided. The top three is availability, performance, functionality of the service that's provided. What vendor, what he's provided, how it's dependent. You know, you want to make sure that you have monitored whatever the dependency is, even if it's just a little service in your application. But it's primarily those three.
I would add something to what Myra said, which is really important, and I think you said it so nicely. I would keep it simple, meaning that a service level agreement and agreement KPIs, they need to be meaningful. I sometimes get contracts from vendors that are giving me this language that I need a PhD in network engineering to be able to understand. I just want a latency measurement. I care about X, so most of our customers, all of us in this room, they care about, can I get to your site or your website or your application? Is it up or is it down? And if it's up or down, or if it's up, how slow it is. And then the other piece is the reliability function. How consistently are you able to deliver a level of service? So it's reachability, availability, performance, and reliability, but make it useful. Like, for example, if I own a website that sells widgets, then I need to have SLAs that basically can give some visibility into how successful am I at selling widgets, right? If I'm in the chat business, how many chats can I handle, etc., etc. So keep it simple. I hate when SLAs are just like so meaningless that nobody cares about them and they discard them.
All right, we're coming up on the top of the hour. So Larry, Jason, anything else to add as far as specific KPIs people should be monitoring for?
No, I think they covered that pretty well.
Yeah, I mean, like Myra said, you basically get your three: availability, performance, and it fulfills the functionality required, right? After that, it's kind of just specific based on the type of service and the requirements around it. Then you can go into specific granularities around your SLA. But when you're crafting the SLA, like even for us, like what Manny said, like we try to stay away from very obtuse SLAs. We always just stuck to, this is how we monitor it, and these are the two metrics we'll give you, and that's what we'll judge our SLA by, right?
Right. All right, great. So I want to thank our entire panel again for all the contributions today, as well as the audience for staying on this whole time and submitting such great questions. So before we go, I want to recommend some reading materials on service level management in case any of you out there are interested in some more education on how to set up and manage their SLA initiatives. In particular, I'd like to call out the first two books listed here by Rick Strum and Ami Nahari. Ami was actually supposed to join today as well, but unfortunately had to drop. So the least you can all do is go out and pick up his book on secrets of service level management. Both of these are really great foundational documents and really useful in terms of getting an SLM program up and running, and they provide a great base of suggestions for ensuring service, on a 24/7 basis. So that wraps things up. I'd like to once again thank Myra, Larry, Jason, and Mehdi for your time and expertise here today. This was a really great discussion. We really appreciate everything you guys have provided. And I want to wish everyone else out there a great rest of your day.
Thank you so much, everybody.